Hello and welcome again to 10 Things About Writing. Today I'm going to talk about food and the use of food in storytelling. And it's an old topic and a very valuable one. Food is an entry into all kinds of things. It's an entry into memory. We remember a lot via food. Everybody has something from their childhood, the taste of which will bring back memories. It's a good entry into character because it can give you an opportunity to go into your character's past. Food is universal. Everybody understands it. Everybody has memories of food, experiences, feelings around food. Food is one of the easiest ways to engage with a culture on a very superficial level, but it's meaningful nevertheless. If you're writing about another culture, if you want to experience another culture, it's often a good way to start with food and language. Language takes a long time to learn, but food is immediate. Food can be all kinds of things. It can be a pleasure. It can also be a source of tension, anxiety. It can be a negative. It can span a whole range of different feelings, because actually writing about food is mostly writing about feelings. It is not really writing about the process of eating, because actually when you really try to write about those things, they often come out sounding rather dull. I'm going to give you some examples here, I think, of how probably not to write about food, because they're not very effective. It's from a book. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but it's a published book which was reasonably successful. This one actually is all full of recipes. I'm not sure how I feel about actually having recipes in a novel. I don't think it's a great thing to do. I think if you are going to include part of a recipe in a descriptive passage, that's fine. But having pages set by for recipes just seems rather odd to me and seems to be missing a trick. Because there are lots of recipe books out there. Novels, I would expect something slightly different from a novel. I would expect feelings, and you can't really put feelings into a recipe. This bit is somebody eating a pasty. And the author has a habit of doing something which I'm going to highlight here. I bite into one of Stan's pasties, noting the crisp crunch of the pastry, the saltiness of the corned beef. There's nothing especially bad about this, but there's nothing especially good about it either. And we don't need to be told that corned beef is salty, or that pastry is crunchy, or that to eat something you bite it. All of these things are very obvious, and I would hope that a really good writer would try to go beyond what's obvious into something else. There's another bit here which I think is interesting, and this is the character having a meal with somebody else, and it's an excuse to access tension between these two people. Around us, the other cooks continue to serve up lunches, remove hot trays from the oven, replace empty containers on the counter, and stack dishes as high as the ceiling. Although I've lost my appetite, I suck in the scents of gravy, custard, and baked apples. I see Mad Dog's scowling face in the distance, but she can't see me. Digging into the pie, I chew a small mouthful. It tastes better than before. Well, again, it's not a bad passage exactly, but it's also not great in that there's a lot of focus on chewing, biting, and I think that the more we hear about these things, the physicality of food, the less appealing it sounds. Because actually it's a bit like writing about sex, and we'll probably have a session on that later too. Everybody knows what the physicality of food is like, and focusing on it tends to make for prose which is a bit dull. I see a lot of people writing about food, and instead of concentrating on what the taste allows you to access as a writer, they concentrate on the mechanics. So somebody bites, somebody chews, somebody swallows. These things are not very interesting, and I always find myself, when I'm reading that kind of thing, skimming over it, because actually it's not telling me anything that I don't already know about food. However, you can use food for all kinds of effects. I don't think it should ever be stuck in gratuitously. I don't think anybody should be going, we need a food scene now, putting a food scene in. You can actually use food for so many really useful, important things in your plot that there's absolutely no excuse for just sticking a food scene in because you think it's trendy or sexy or something like that. But food is a great gateway to all kinds of things. I'm going to read you a piece from a rather old book by Mary Stewart called Madam, Will You Talk? And this is a food scene which is being used to break tension. There's been a long build-up to this scene. And actually there's a long history of food scenes being used to break tension. Very often you will find characters in a fantasy novel having a big feast, either after a battle or before a battle or before something important happens. If you look at The Lord of the Rings, there are constant uses of this technique. A big feast before you go to the next leg of the adventure. And so very often food is a tension-breaking mechanism. And in this scene, that's absolutely what it is. The heroine has been pursued for miles by the man she thinks is the villain. She realises now he isn't the villain, and she realises over this meal that she has with him. I remember still those exquisite fluted silver dishes, each with its load of dainty colours. There were anchovies and tiny gleaming silver fish in red sauce, and savoury butter in curled strips of fresh lettuce. There were caviar, and tomato and olives green and black, and small golden pink mushrooms, and cresses and beans. The waiter heaped my plate and filled another glass with white wine. I drank half a glassful without a word and began to eat. I was conscious of Richard Byron's eyes on me, but he did not speak. The waiters hovered beside us. The courses came, delicious and appetising, and the empty plates vanished as if by magic. I remember red mullet, done somehow with lemons, and a succulent golden brown fowl bursting with truffles and flanked by tiny peas, then a froth of ice and whipped cream dashed with kirsch, and the fine smooth caress of the wine through it all. Then finally apricots and big black grapes and coffee. The waiter removed the little silver filters and vanished, leaving us alone in our alcove. Well, when you have a look at that, it's really just a list of things, isn't it? And yet it sort of works. It works to build up this atmosphere. It is a kind of magical meal at the end of a very tense series of passages. It is a means of relaxing the tension from the writer's perspective and giving the reader a bit of a breather as well. Now, Mary Stewart hasn't gone to any great lengths here to describe the process of eating. She assumes that we all know what eating's like. So instead she concentrates on the food. And by doing that, she does two things. One, she gives a sort of fairy tale feel to this scene. This is almost like one of those magical meals in fairy stories. It has a sort of out of time feeling. It is a moment of intimacy between her and the man she thought was her enemy and she now realises is her friend and perhaps something more. It also conveys the fact that she's still afraid to talk to this man, and so she concentrates on the food instead because that's the easiest thing to do. It's very difficult to remain tense for a long time over a long meal in that way. And the food is appealing. It obviously sounds like marvellous food, but, not everybody likes all those things, but it doesn't really matter. It's It's a scene whereby the sensuality of food kind of emerges almost effortlessly. She doesn't do anything to make it sound sensual, and yet there is sexual tension between these two characters. I'm going to read you another piece from this book by Lily Pryor called La Cucina, which is all about food. And this one really is sensuality. Food is a great entry into sensuality, and very often it's a kind of shortcut. If you look at a poem like Keats' The Eve of St. Agnes, there is lots of food in there. There is the lover who brings his lady all this food, and it's very clearly a kind of shortcut to sex. Lily Pryor does a very, very similar thing here. As night fell, we set the stratu on the porch to keep it free of dew, which would make it moist again and spoil it. Then together we prepared a magnificent tonno alla Siracusa, fresh from the sea. I showed L'Inglese how to slice little incisions in the fragrant flesh of the fish and fill them with a mixture of crushed garlic, cloves and coriander. I loved the way he wielded a knife with the flamboyant gestures of his beautiful hands. Everything this man did with his hands had me fascinated. Once the fish was well stuffed with the garlic mixture, we added it to the pan containing the onions we had already softened. Tomatoes, white wine vinegar, and oregano were added next, and while the dish cooked, it filled the air with a sumptuous aroma of garlic, herbs, and wine. This heady cocktail stimulated the passions of the hungry and impatient cooks. You can tell from this little passage that these two people are in love, or are falling in love. Her fixation on the man's hands, the language she uses is clearly a kind of pre-sexual experience. And there are several other passages in this book that do the same. And what you have here is definitely a recipe, but it's not one of these bland standalone recipes that other, I think, lesser writers have used in books that are ostensibly about food. It is properly embedded into the scene. All of it has a meaning. It has a purpose. And this is what you need in a food scene. You always need a purpose. It's either a scene that brings two characters together, or that emphasises tension between two characters, or brings out the past. And of course, food can be very uncomfortable. It can be a very good excuse to show discomfort between characters. And this book by Bali Rai, Unarranged Marriage, does this very well. It's a book about a young man of the Asian community. There is very little Asian food in it, which I quite like because, we don't want stereotypes in our literature either. But this bit is about Frosties. And it's about the relationship between the young man and his father. Anyway, one Saturday in May, my old man was getting everything together for yet another wedding trip. I was sitting in the lounge watching kids' TV and eating Frosties without milk straight from the box. My dad walked in and belched twice. The sound echoed around the room like heavy thunder. I was so used to him doing that all I did was pull a face and then carry on watching telly. "Manjit," he began, pointing to the cereal box. "Getting bloody bowl for them." "Yes, Daddy G." I always made sure that I was extra polite to him the morning after a real bender, and using G after Dad indicated respect for your elders, and that was just what was required when he began one of his mega hangovers. I went and got a bowl from the kitchen, but still didn't add any milk. It's not so much a scene about food, but a scene that uses food to exacerbate tension between two characters where tension already exists. We don't care much about the Frosties, although it does say something about the character, the way he eats them. It's often a very good entry into character to see how somebody eats and what they eat. In this case, the idea of eating Frosties without putting them in a bowl is something that all of us can recognise, it's all of us can relate to. And it's a nice little touch to emphasise the the pivot that this young man is between childhood and adulthood, and of course the business with his old man, who is a drunk, using the food as an excuse to bully him, basically is also something that's indicative of his character and their relationship, and it will come out later. The last one I'm going to read you is also from this book, from Unarranged Marriage. And this is a scene where Manjit has gone to India, not quite for the first time, but he's not terribly comfortable there, and this is an uncomfortable food scene. The women, including my mum, were gathered around an open kitchen area at one end of the veranda, next to the entrance to an indoor kitchen. They had started an open barbecue-style fire and were beginning to cook in pots that were so old they were burnt and blackened. The air was full of the smell of frying onions and garam masala, coriander and cardamoms. Earlier in the day, my uncle had butchered a couple of chickens and filleted them. Jas, wanting to make a good impression by the look of things, told everyone about how English people had gone crazy over Balti dishes, only for my uncle to suggest that she made one. I wasn't even sure that I was going to eat it, not when the chickens had been killed specially for that purpose. The shock of being so close to the actual butchering had made me feel bad. "Don't worry," laughed Harry. "We'll soon make a real man of you in it. Just wait, you chamar." Well, this is an interesting scene because, for a start, it is the hero's culture, but he is not quite comfortable in it, and food is being used as a means to reflect that. He's squeamish about the idea of chickens being butchered for the meal. And yet there's definitely a sense of atmosphere, but he's uneasy within that atmosphere, which is an important character point for him. So to summarise, food, it's a great entry into all kinds of things, to character, to sensuality, to relationships. It's a good means of breaking tension. I'm not sure it's a great way of using recipes to just put them at the beginning of a chapter, but some people do, and it might work for them, but I think they're missing something important about the meaning of those recipes, and I think it's much better to insert them into dialogue and into a scene. Till next time, happy writing and goodbye.